Hello, and welcome back to the SanteDB Quick Fix video tutorial series. As you can tell from my quarantine beard, it's been quite a while since we've released a video on our channel. We're hoping to change that for February. We're going to have quite a bit of video content coming out in February showing actual use of SanteMPI. But in this video, we're going to finish up our installation tutorial series, and today we're going to be installing SanteDB on an Ubuntu Linux environment. We're going to show our Linux users how it is that we can install SanteDB in a Linux server environment. So without further ado, let's get to it. All right, so I have here, just like on our Windows installation video, the releases links, and what we're going to do is we're going to download the SanteMPI and the Web Access Gateway. And just like on Windows, we're going to download the assets. However, because we're doing this on Linux, instead of downloading the installer, we're going to download the tarball. So I'm just going to go ahead and save these files. So I'm going to save my SanteMPI tarball, and I'm going to save my Web Access Gateway tarball. And the other thing I'm going to do, if I go to my Quick Start guide, is we're actually going to need the installation qualification test suite. So I'm just going to go ahead and download this. It's on the SanteMPI GitHub. But you can actually just hit download here, and we're just going to save it. And I'm just going to save it to my downloads folder, and I'm just going to give it, leave it the default name. And I have here SoapUI already installed, just like on our Windows and our Docker installation. We need to have SoapUI running so we can actually run the subscription tests and the installation qualification toolkit. Now, this is a blank copy of Ubuntu 20.04. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up a terminal here. And by blank, I just mean it has the JVM installed and it has SoapUI installed and nothing else, just stock Ubuntu desktop. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change to my downloads directory. And I can see here that I've got my Web Access Gateway and my MPI tarballs. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a tar extraction. And we're going to extract SanteMPI, the server, first. And this is going to extract the contents into a directory called SanteMPI and then the version number. And what I want to do is just run the install.sh file. And because I haven't run sudo install.sh, the script's going to ask me if I want to run it as sudo. I'm just going to hit yes. Then the system or the installer is going to detect whether or not we have mono installed. And if we don't, is the case with my virtual machine. It's going to ask us if we want to install mono. So it's going to go ahead and fetch the latest apt repositories, and it's going to go ahead and install the complete mono framework that is needed to run the iCDR. Depending on the speed of the machine that you're running this on, this could take anywhere from 5 minutes all the way up to an hour, again, depending on the speed of your virtual infrastructure. So I'll leave it at this, and I'll get back to you when it's done installing for me. Okay, so our installation for mono is just finishing up. And the next thing that the iCDR is going to do is it's going to detect whether or not we have PostgreSQL installed. And of course, PostgreSQL is required for SanteDB to be able to store its data. And if you're installing this on a single virtual machine, like we are for this demonstration, you're going to have PostgreSQL locally on your virtual machine or your computer. However, if you're already running PostgreSQL on another machine, as you would in production, you would answer no to that question and simply connect to your PostgreSQL instance. And because I'm installing this into my development virtual machine, I actually have to set a default password for the Postgre user so the configuration tool can actually construct the database that I want. So I'm just going to switch into a new console window, and I'm going to go sudo su dash, and I want to go into the Postgre account, and I'm just going to type in PSQL, and I'm going to alter user Postgre with password. And because this is just a demo, I'm going to use a super secret password from a Postgre user. And I'm going to exit out of that and come back to my installer. And of course, if you already have PostgreSQL set up with user accounts and passwords, you can skip that step. So next thing's going to happen is we're going to be asked to accept the Apache license, because that is what SanteSuite is licensed under. So we're going to say yes. Then I'm going to be asked where I want to install the iCDR, and by default we put everything in the opt directory. I'm just going to press enter to accept the default. We can see here we've copied over our files and we've installed our security certificates. And now we're being asked if we want to install SanteDB as a daemon or a Linux daemon. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit yes. And then I'm going to be asked, do I want to start on system start? And I'm just going to say yes again. And now we have the SanteDB server actually installed as a Linux daemon that we can control with systemctl. So you can see here, we've got start and stop the SanteDB service. Next, the system's going to ask me if I want to configure SanteDB instance, and you can see if you've watched our Windows tutorial that the configuration tool loads here in Linux as well. And I'm going to select PostgreSQL. I'm running on the same server. My password was Postgre because that's super secure. And if I type in my credentials, I can see here that we can connect to our database. And once again, it's an empty PostgreSQL database. So I'm just going to click New. And I'm going to name this SanteDB. And I'm like, OK. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to enable pooling. So we'll enable connection pooling. And I want to install SanteMPI server. So I'm just going to press continue. And the system, or the configuration tool here, is going to load our configuration file and then apply our configuration. And you can see here that the service, restarting SanteDB service, this is not actually doing anything. It's attempting to connect to the Windows Service Manager, so it just times out. But we can go ahead and use our configuration tool. Now, if you're using the configuration tool on Linux, one of the things that you might notice is Mono's support for property grids is not great. So we do recommend, if you are going to be using the configuration tool on Linux, you use the setting editor. And the setting editor allows us to edit the individual sections within the file, rather than trying to have the configuration tool create a custom property grid. It's just directly bound to the property grid. And I'm going to go here and I'm going to say I only want informational logs. And on my trace writer, this is warning, so that's okay. And my sources, I'm just going to turn down the logging here and see that we have just informational logging, which we do. And I'm going to go ahead and apply these changes. Hit OK. And once again, the configuration is applied, and you will get your configuration screen back. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and I'll wait for this to load, but I can actually close this configuration tool now. And if I go into my SanteDB directory, I can see here that I have all of my files. And I can actually do a sudo systemctl start SanteDB. And if I systemctl status SanteDB, I should see here that the system service is currently running. And if I check my installation directory for log files, I can see I actually have a log file here. And I'm just going to go ahead and follow that log file. And this is going to allow us to see what the logging is occurring in the SanteDB server. And right now, just like on Windows, the initial configuration of SanteDB iCDR does take some time. It is right now doing the same thing as Windows. It is seeding in different database contents from the default install. So we're just going to monitor the log here and wait for that to finish. So I can see here it's still inserting some files. If I go to my web browser and I navigate to localhost 8080 API docs, I'm going to see that we have our Swagger documentation up and running. And this really means that SanteDB server now is running on my Linux virtual machine. So if I come back, I can see here it's initialized the JavaScript API inside of the server. So I'm just going to go ahead and press Control-C to cancel out of that. And I'm going to go back to my downloads directory here, and I'm going to install the Web Access Gateway now. Web Access Gateway installation is actually very similar. We just untar the file, we change into that directory, and then we run the installation scripts. And I accept the license, install default, and we're going to, yes, install the Web Access Gateway as a daemon. Yes, we're going to start it when the system starts. And I can see here that we have systemctl start SanteDB is the command. But actually what's going to happen is, if I look at my current status, the installer is going to go ahead and install or start the service for us. And that's because the Web Access Gateway doesn't require any separate configuration process. So if I actually visit the URL that's provided by the installer, I can see here that we have our all familiar SanteDB Web Access Gateway configuration. So I'm just going to go ahead and configure it to talk to localhost. And we're going to log in with administrator and Mohawk123. Save that password. And we're welcome to the domain, and we have our admin package here. On the MPI later installers, this is a known issue with 2.1.161 that the MPI applet file isn't actually included in the distribution. We're working on that. So for now, I'm just going to set it to the admin. And we're just going to go ahead and configure the settings just like we normally would. And I'm going to go ahead and wait for the page to refresh. That is how we configure the SanteDB Linux Web Access Gateway. And again, normally on SanteMPI, we would be using the SanteMPI applet, but the version I'm using, or the installer I'm using, is missing that particular packaging file. So if I log in to my server, you can see it's actually got the exact same data as our Windows install does. So I can go to security, go to groups, and I can assign administrators the MDM permission and assign them clinical data, unrestricted clinical data. And we're going to log out. And if we log back in, I guess I should have saved that password. We can see here now that we have complete access to the MPI. So let's go to our SOAP UI, and we're going to start the Fire mock service here. And one of the things I'm going to do, just like on Windows, I do want to change the configuration subscription notifications. Instead of going to docker.internal, which is for Docker instances, I'm just going to go ahead and change this to localhost, localhost as well. So what I've just done here is I've actually changed the Fire subscription messages. Instead of notifying host.docker.internal, it's going to be notifying localhost, which is my server here. And I'm going to go ahead and open up my qualification, and I'm just going to go ahead and run this. And if I flip back over to my MPI here, and I refresh the page, I can see that I've now got patients being seated in. And one of the changes that's occurred since version 2.1.160 of SanteMPI and SanteDB is that all of your reports for patients are through materialized views. So what I'll see here is I've got patients who have been registered, but my reports still say 0. And that's because I actually have to go in and unless I want to wait for the job to automatically run at midnight every night, I can go ahead and manually run the refresh. And if I go back to my dashboard, you'll see now I have an accurate refreshed report for my patient population. So there you have it. We've installed SanteMPI with the Web Access Gateway on a Linux environment that we host. If you're using a headless Linux server through like SSH and you don't have access to the user interface, you can use nano or vi to edit the santedb.config.xml file manually. There are instructions on what that configuration file looks like on our wiki. Once again, I just want to thank you for joining us and watching this installation tutorial, and I'll see you next time.